My wife sent me a care package with a DNA test inside and a note. Don't come back. He's not yours, and neither is the house. The package arrived during mail call at the Kuwait base. I stared at the return address for a full minute, surprised to see Tessa had sent anything at all. 8 months into my deployment, this was the first contact from my wife. I carried the box back to my bunk, ignoring the usual chaos of the barracks. The package was lighter than expected. No cookies, no snacks, none of the usual comforts from home. I sliced through the tape with my pocket knife. Inside was a small cardboard box and a folded note on our wedding stationery. The familiar cream paper with our names embossed at the top made my stomach tighten. I unfolded the note first. The message was brief, written in Tessa's neat handwriting. Don't come back. He's not yours, and neither is the house. The words didn't make sense at first. I read them again, feeling like I'd been punched. He's not yours, Tyler. My 4-year-old son. The boy with my eyes, my stubborn cowlick, the gap between his front teeth. I dumped out the rest of the package. A DNA test kit tumbled onto my bunk. The instructions were highlighted in yellow, the return envelope already addressed and stamped. My hands went numb. I tried calling Tessa immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message that probably made no sense. I tried again 10 minutes later, then again. Ronan found me sitting on my bunk an hour later, still staring at the test kit. He took one look at my face and sat down. What's wrong, man? I handed him the note without speaking. He read it twice, then whispered a string of curses. This has to be some kind of mistake, he said finally. I tried calling Tessa again, and again, and again. For 2 days, I called every few hours, leaving increasingly desperate messages. She never answered. Faith, the base counselor, squeezed me in for an emergency session after Ronan reported my state of mind to our commanding officer. I was barely sleeping, barely eating. The words kept repeating in my head. He's not yours. I finally called Mrs. Rivera, our next-door neighbor back home. She sounded surprised to hear from me. She hadn't seen Tessa or Tyler in over a week. Their car was gone. The house looked empty. I requested emergency leave that same day. Wesley, my CO, pushed the paperwork through despite our critical staffing. 3 days later, I was on a transport plane heading stateside. The DNA test kit still unopened in my bag. The flight gave me too much time to think. I scrolled through photos of Tyler on my phone, his 4th birthday party just before my deployment, his first day of preschool, the fishing trip where he caught his first bluegill. I stared at his face in each picture, searching for someone else's features. All I saw was my son. The boy who called me daddy, who cried when I left for Kuwait, who asked on every video call when I was coming home. The house was dark when the taxi dropped me off. No lights, no movement behind the curtains. I used my key to unlock the front door, half expecting it not to work. The silence hit me first, then the emptiness. The living room furniture was still there, but all the photos were gone from the walls. Tyler's toys were missing from the corner where his play area had been. I walked through each room in a daze. The kitchen cabinets were half empty. Tyler's bedroom had been stripped of everything except the furniture. Tessa's closet was bare. A stack of mail sat on the kitchen counter. Official-looking envelopes addressed to Marcus Langford. Bills I didn't recognize. Letters from attorneys. An IRS notice about unpaid taxes dating back 5 years. One envelope caught my eye, a law firm letterhead addressed to Marcus Langford regarding a Phoenix address I'd never lived at, and a court judgment from 2019. The social security number listed was 1 digit off from mine. I sank into a kitchen chair, surrounded by the remnants of my life. I pulled out my phone and called Tessa's sister, Paige. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice wary. Marcus, why are you back? Tessa said you wouldn't be home for months. Where is she, Paige? Where's my son? My voice cracked on the last word. There was a long pause. Stop looking for them, Marcus. It's better this way. For everyone's safety. What are you talking about? Safety from what? From me? I heard her take a deep breath. You need to let this go, please, for Tyler's sake. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then at the DNA test kit I'd placed on the counter. With shaking hands, I opened it and followed the instructions. I paid extra for rush processing when I mailed it the next morning. Then I returned home to sort through the mail. The final envelope was hidden underneath the stack, postmarked from the Colorado Department of Corrections. It was addressed to Marcus Whitlock. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it made my blood run cold. I tore open the envelope and began to read. I walked through the empty house in shock. The furniture remained, but all the personal touches were gone. Photos, keepsakes, Tyler's artwork from preschool all vanished. I opened the kitchen cabinets again. Tessa had taken her grandmother's china and the wedding crystal. She'd left the everyday dishes and a few mismatched mugs. The stack of mail on the counter seemed to mock me. I spread the envelopes across the table and sorted them by date. The oldest was from 8 months ago, right after my deployment began. I opened a letter from a collection agency first. It demanded payment of nearly $30,000 for a luxury car purchased in Phoenix. I had never bought a car in Phoenix. The next envelope contained credit card statements for accounts I'd never opened. Someone had charged over $50,000 in electronics, furniture, and cash advances. The signature on the application wasn't mine, but it was close. I called Daphne Wilson, a lawyer friend from high school. She agreed to meet me for coffee that afternoon. I gathered all the documents and drove to the cafe with my mind racing. Daphne reviewed the papers with a deepening frown. She tapped her pen against the table as she read. "This looks like textbook identity theft," she said finally. "But why would Tessa leave because of this?" I asked. "None of this makes sense." Daphne pointed to the social security number on the IRS notice. "It's 1 digit off from yours. That's a sophisticated approach, not completely stealing your identity, but creating a shadow version that's harder to detect. I stared at the papers spread across the cafe table. What about the letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections? The one addressed to Marcus Whitlock? Daphne's expression changed. She set down her coffee cup carefully. I think you should hire a private investigator. This goes beyond ordinary identity theft. I called Jamal Washington that evening. He came highly recommended by Daphne and had 20 years of experience in criminal investigations. He agreed to take the case immediately. The Phoenix address was our first lead. Jamal promised to have someone check it out by tomorrow. Meanwhile, I needed to deal with the DNA test hanging over my head. I called the lab and paid an extra $500 for rush processing. The woman on the phone promised results within 72 hours. I gave her my cell number and email, desperate for answers. That night, I tried calling Paige again. She answered with obvious reluctance. Marcus, I told you to let this go. I need to know what's happening, Paige. Where's Tessa? Where's my son? Her voice dropped to a whisper. They're safe. That's all that matters right now. Tessa found something out about you, something that scared her enough to run. What are you talking about? I demanded. I've never hurt them. I would never hurt them. There was a long pause. It's not about who you are now. It's about who you were. The call ended abruptly. I tried calling back repeatedly, but she'd blocked my number. I threw my phone across the room in frustration. The next morning, Jamal called with his first update. The Phoenix address was an upscale apartment complex. A man matching my description had lived there for 6 months, using the name Marcus Langford. He showed the leasing office my military photo. They confirmed it was the same person. The tenant had moved out 3 weeks ago, leaving no forwarding address. The IRS documents arrived by courier that afternoon. Someone using my slightly altered social security number had filed tax returns for the past 5 years. They claimed income from businesses I'd never heard of. I called Tyrese Johnson, an FBI agent who specialized in identity fraud. We'd met during a military training exercise last year. He reviewed the documents and immediately opened a federal investigation. This isn't random, he said after examining the evidence. Someone has been methodically building a parallel life using your information. The question is why? I returned home and spread all the documents across the kitchen table. The letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections remained unopened. Something about it terrified me. I finally tore it open as the sun was setting. The letter was addressed to inmate 45873, Marcus Whitlock. It confirmed his release date after serving 15 years for armed robbery and assault. Attached was a photo. The man in the mugshot looked exactly like me, but with a jagged scar across his right cheek. I touched my own face, feeling the smooth skin where no scar existed. The release date was 5 years ago. I stared at my reflection in the window, suddenly uncertain of everything I thought I knew about myself. The face looking back at me belonged to a stranger named Marcus Whitlock. I frantically searched through old photos on my laptop. Pictures from before my military service were surprisingly sparse. I found nothing older than 6 years ago. I called my mother in Tennessee. She didn't answer. I left a desperate message asking about my childhood, about any gaps in my history she could explain. That night, I dreamed of a prison cell I'd never seen before. I woke up sweating, with the strange feeling that the dream was actually a memory. The walls were closing in around me. Jamal called early the next morning. His contact in Phoenix had discovered more. The apartment had been paid for in cash. The neighbors described a man who looked like me but acted completely different. According to them, this other Marcus had a violent temper and frequently brought home different women. He'd been arrested twice for bar fights, but charges were always dropped. Tyrese arrived at my house with another agent around noon. They brought a facial recognition report that matched my face to Marcus Whitlock's prison records with 99.8% certainty. We need to take your fingerprints, Tyrese said carefully, to compare them to Whitlock's records. I held out my hands, numb with shock. This couldn't be happening. I was Marcus Langford, communications specialist, husband to Tessa, father to Tyler. I wasn't a convicted felon. The fingerprint scanner beeped. Tyrese's face remained professionally neutral, but I saw the confirmation in his eyes before he spoke. It's a match, he said quietly. The DNA test results arrived 3 days later. I tore open the envelope with shaking hands and scanned the document. The conclusion was printed in bold letters at the bottom. 99.9% probability that the tested man is not the biological father of the child in question. I sat on the couch, staring at the paper. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Tyler wasn't my son. The boy I'd raised for 4 years, taught to ride a bike, read bedtime stories to every night he wasn't mine. I drove to Paige's apartment that afternoon. She tried shutting the door when she saw me, but I blocked it with my foot. I need answers. Paige, now. She reluctantly let me in, checking the hallway before locking the door behind us. Her apartment was cluttered with moving boxes. She was planning to disappear too. I showed her the DNA results. She barely glanced at them. I already knew, she said quietly. Tessa found out about 3 months ago. Found out what? That Tyler isn't mine? I demanded. Or that I'm supposedly this Marcus Whitlock person? Paige's face went pale. She knows everything. The prison records, the escape, all of it. She found your real driver's license hidden in the attic when she was storing Christmas decorations. My head was spinning. This isn't real. I'm Marcus Langford. I've always been Marcus Langford. She pulled out her phone and showed me a news article from 5 years ago. The headline read, "Dangerous inmate escapes during transport." The mugshot showed my face with a jagged scar. Tyrese called while I was still at Paige's. He confirmed what she'd told me. Marcus Whitlock escaped from a prison transport van 5 years ago. He was serving 15 years for armed robbery and assault. The fingerprints were an exact match. The DNA was a match. The facial recognition was a match. According to every database, I was Marcus Whitlock. But I had no memory of being that person. I remembered growing up in Tennessee, Joining the army after high school, meeting Tessa at a friend's barbecue 6 years ago. Those memories felt real. Tyrese arrived at Paige's apartment with a psychologist named Dr. Mercer. She specialized in dissociative disorders and memory loss. She asked if I'd experienced any head trauma around 5 years ago. The question triggered a flash of memory. A transport van rolling over, glass shattering, pain exploding through my skull, blood in my eyes as I crawled through a broken window. I gasped as the memory surfaced. Dr. Mercer nodded like she'd expected this. You likely suffered a traumatic brain injury during the escape, she explained. Combined with the stress, it could have triggered a dissociative fugue state. In simple terms, I created a new identity to escape the trauma. I became Marcus Langford completely, with no conscious memory of being Marcus Whitlock. I asked about my military records. Tyrese explained that I'd used a dead man's social security number. Marcus Langford had been a real person who died as a child in 1985. The military's background check had missed it because the real Langford had no adult records. I'd created convincing documentation and passed the physical and psychological evaluations. I spent that night in a hotel room, unable to sleep. My entire identity was unraveling. The man I thought I was had never existed. The life I'd built was founded on lies I couldn't even remember telling. Jamal called early the next morning. His team had located Tessa and Tyler. They were staying at a remote cabin near the Georgia-Tennessee border, owned by Tessa's uncle. I need to see her, I told him. I need to understand what happened. Jamal warned me that approaching them might violate the conditions of my release. If I was Marcus Whitlock, I was technically an escaped convict. The FBI was still deciding how to handle the situation. I didn't care. I drove 6 hours to the cabin, rehearsing what I would say to Tessa. The dirt road leading to the property was nearly impassable. My rental car scraped bottom several times. The cabin appeared through the trees around sunset. Tessa's car was parked outside. Smoke rose from the chimney. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, gathering courage. Finally, I walked to the door and knocked. Tessa opened it with a baseball bat in her hand. Her eyes widened when she saw me. How did you find us? She demanded, keeping the bat raised between us. I just want to talk, I said. I know everything now, about who I really am. She studied my face, searching for signs of deception. Tyler's voice called from inside, asking who was at the door. Tessa yelled back for him to stay in his room. She stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her. You shouldn't be here, Marcus. Or should I call you Whitlock now? I don't know who I am anymore, I admitted. I don't remember being him. Everything I know about myself feels real to me. Tessa's grip on the bat loosened slightly. I found your old license in a box in the attic. It had your real name, your prison ID card, newspaper clippings about the crimes. I tried to imagine hiding those things, creating a new identity, starting a new life. None of it felt like something I would do, but apparently, I had. When did you know? I asked. When did you realize who I was? 3 months ago, she said. I googled your real name and found everything. The robberies, the assault charges, your escape. I was terrified. She explained how she'd contacted the authorities anonymously, how she'd planned her escape carefully, waiting until I was deployed overseas, how she'd taken Tyler and disappeared. I never hurt you, I said. I never hurt Tyler. Whatever I did before, the man you married wasn't violent. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. But you lied about everything. Our entire marriage was built on a lie. How could I trust anything about you? The door opened behind her. Tyler stood there in dinosaur pajamas, his brown eyes wide with surprise. Daddy, he said, you came back from the army? I froze, not knowing what to say. This boy wasn't biologically mine. I wasn't the person he thought I was. Yet the love I felt for him was the most real thing in my life. Tessa quickly ushered him back inside. I'll be right there, buddy, she said before turning back to me. You need to leave, now. As I walked back to my car, another memory surfaced. A convenience store, a gun in my hand, a terrified clerk, the weight of stolen cash in a backpack, the rush of adrenaline followed by crushing shame. I sat in my car, memories flooding back in fragments, the prison cell, the fights, the escape plan, the new identity carefully constructed over months of research. The man I used to be was becoming real to me, and I hated him. I started the car and drove away from the cabin, away from the family that had never truly been mine. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't run anymore. It was time to face the truth about Marcus Whitlock. I drove back to the cabin parking lot and called Tyrese. I was done running. The memories of Marcus Whitlock were flooding back now, impossible to deny. Tyrese arrived 3 hours later with 2 other agents. I surrendered without resistance. The handcuffs felt strangely familiar against my wrists. The ride to the federal detention center was silent. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. My 2 lives were colliding in my head, memories fighting for dominance. I spent 2 weeks in custody before my first court appearance. Dr. Mercer visited daily, helping me piece together my fragmented identity. The dissociative fugue diagnosis was officially entered into my records. My court-appointed attorney had 30 years of experience with unusual cases. She argued that Marcus Whitlock had effectively ceased to exist after the transport accident. The man who stood before the court was, in many ways, a different person. The judge was skeptical at first. He reviewed my military service records, commendations from commanding officers, and psychiatric evaluations. The prosecutor pushed for the maximum sentence for escape and identity fraud. Dr. Mercer testified about my complete psychological break. She explained how trauma can fracture a person's identity so completely that they genuinely have no awareness of their previous life. The court listened intently. To everyone's surprise, Tessa appeared at the sentencing hearing. She described the man she had married. Kind, patient, hardworking, nothing like the violent criminal in the original case files. The judge deliberated for 3 days. His final decision acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the case. I would serve 5 years for the escape and fraud, with credit for my military service. I was transferred to a minimum security facility in Colorado. The prison psychologist continued the integration therapy Dr. Mercer had started. Slowly, I reconciled my two identities into a coherent narrative. The hardest part was writing apology letters to my victims from years ago, the store clerk I'd terrorized, the security guard I'd injured, the families whose sense of safety I'd destroyed. I remembered it all now. Ronan visited 6 months into my sentence. He'd been shocked by the news, but said he still considered me his friend. The man he'd served with in Kuwait wasn't the same person who had committed those crimes. I received a letter from Tessa on the anniversary of my arrest. She explained why she'd run when she discovered the truth. She'd been terrified that the violent man from the newspaper articles would resurface and hurt Tyler. But she also wrote about the good memories, the man who had held her hand through 2 miscarriages, who had adopted Tyler without question when she became pregnant by another man during our brief separation, who had never shown a hint of violence. I read that letter until the paper was worn thin. Tyler wasn't biologically mine, but I had loved him as my son. That love had been real, even if everything else about me had been a lie. In my 3rd year of incarceration, Tessa brought Tyler for a supervised visit. He was 7 now, confused about who I was and why I was in prison. I told him a simplified version of the truth. Tyler asked if I was a bad guy. I told him I had done bad things a long time ago, but I was trying to be better. He nodded with the simple acceptance that only children possess. Daphne visited regularly, helping prepare for my eventual release. She secured a spot in a halfway house and found a re-entry program specifically for veterans with mental health issues. My military service still counted for something. My final year passed quickly. I completed every rehabilitation program available. The prison counselor noted my exceptional progress in understanding the factors that had led to my original crimes. I was released on a cold Tuesday morning in December. Daphne picked me up at the gate and drove me to the halfway house. The world had changed during my 5 years inside. The halfway house had strict rules. Curfew, regular check-ins, mandatory employment. I found work at a warehouse that hired people with criminal records. The pay was minimal, but it was honest work. Tessa agreed to monthly supervised visits with Tyler. He was 9 now, more curious about who I was and what had happened. We built a cautious relationship, nothing like the easy bond we'd once shared, but something real. One afternoon, Tyler asked if he could still call me Dad sometimes. The question caught me off guard. I told him he could call me whatever felt right to him. He nodded and went back to the board game we were playing. I legally changed my name before completing the halfway house program. Not back to Marcus Whitlock, but not Langford either. I chose Marcus Rivers, a fresh start that acknowledged both sides of my history. Tessa remarried when Tyler was 10. Her new husband was a good man, a teacher who treated Tyler well. I was grateful that my son had stability and a positive male influence in his daily life. The court eventually granted me unsupervised visitation. Tyler spent 1 weekend a month at my small apartment. We went fishing, played video games, talked about his school projects. Normal father-son activities. On Tyler's 12th birthday, he asked about my scar. The jagged mark on my cheek had faded but was still visible. I told him the truth. It had happened during my escape when the transport van crashed. He touched his own face in the same spot. "I was glad you forgot who you were," he said suddenly. "If you hadn't, you wouldn't have been my dad at all." Those words stayed with me long after he went home. Marcus Whitlock had been a violent criminal who hurt people without remorse. Marcus Langford had been a fiction, a complete fabrication. But the love I felt for Tyler had always been genuine. I still met with a therapist weekly. The integration of my two identities remained an ongoing process. Some days I felt more like Whitlock, haunted by the crimes I'd committed. Other days, Langford's military discipline and sense of honor dominated. Tyrese checked in occasionally, making sure I was staying on the right path. Our relationship had evolved from investigator and suspect to something like friendship. He said my case had changed how he viewed identity and rehabilitation. 10 years after my release, Tyler graduated high school. He invited me to the ceremony along with his mother and stepfather. We sat in separate rows but smiled at each other across the auditorium. I watched Tyler accept his diploma, tall and confident at 18. He wasn't biologically mine, and I had missed many of his formative years. But I had been there at the beginning, had taught him to ride a bike, had read him bedtime stories. After the ceremony, Tyler introduced me to his friends as his dad. Not his biological father, not his former father, just his dad. In that moment, I understood that identity isn't just about DNA or memories or legal names. I was Marcus Rivers now, a man with a dark past and an uncertain future, but I was also Tyler's dad. That was the most real thing about me.